Thank you, Christy, for reminding me to turn the camera on, and welcome to those of you who are watching the video later on. So we will recap topic 9, where we talk about young people's participation and voice. Then we'll go straight into professional collaboration, and I've got Jacinta third, but she's actually going to be first. So the learning outcomes for tonight's workshop are, again, evaluating practices that strengthen inclusion and analysing responsive inclusive practices for everybody, for all learners, that include students with disability within particular educational contexts. And what I want you to be able to know at the end of this particular topic is what the characteristics of effective interprofessional collaboration are and the roles of the various people who should be involved. And I want you to be able to do some active identification of barriers and facilitators around what that collaboration should, what can help it happen and what hinders it happening in schools, particularly students with those really complex learning profiles. And we're focusing in particular this week on students who use alternative and augmentative communication. Jacinta, I'm going to come to you in a moment. I'll come back to these. I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to who are we talking about here? Who are these students with complex learning profiles? Well, it's a big, broad term. It can include students with developmental disabilities. They might have cerebral palsy. They might have an intellectual disability. They might have a traumatic brain injury. They might have complex communication needs. They might even have several of these. And they may also be transgender. They might live in poverty. They might live in regional or rural locations. They might be Indigenous. There's all sorts of ways in which we are intersectional beings. So it's important to remember that complex learning profiles often means needing support from multiple clinicians and service providers. And I'm going to stop sharing for a moment here. So as I said before, this is my friend and colleague, Jacinta Conway, who's joined us tonight. Jacinta and I have worked on the Council Together for Learning Difficulties Australia over the last year. And Jacinta's a very experienced primary school teacher and specialist in the area of reading. And she's currently running Tier 3 intervention for students outside the school setting, but she collaborates closely with schools. So a lot of what she does in the intervention setting is informed by what is or should be happening in students' classrooms and ideally gets fed back into. And Jacinta's been playing, well, Jacinta, I might let you talk a little bit about what you've been playing with and how you got here.
Thank you. I'll just put myself on mute. Let me know if you can hear me okay, and feel free to jump in anytime, Kate, because we're flying on the, what do you say when you're on the fly here a bit?
See we chatting this morning.
Yeah. So I've had this idea that I just really wanted to throw out to Kate the last couple of weeks, and I finally got to tell her today, and she said, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I want you to share. So I wanted to just give a little bit of context. I've taught in primary schools predominantly for about 20 years. I think I've taught in more than 5 schools, and some of those schools have been ELC to Year 12. And it's probably a half-half of state schools and independent schools. And I've also taught overseas. So in London for a good 5 years. And in that time, especially in London, like everyone just went to the same school, as far as I could tell. I know they had special units for things here and there, but it didn't seem to have the same sense of when I came back to Australia that when I was exploring dyslexia and working out why kids couldn't read, which I've been doing now for about 12 years, somebody had said to me very early on in that journey, oh, you're moving now into disability. Maybe you might want to look at working in schools and disabilities. And I went, well, aren't there kids in mainstream schools with disabilities? You don't need to go anywhere else to work with kids with disabilities. They're in our schools that we're in. So that was always where I wanted to be. And then within that, I was working out why kids couldn't learn to read, which was a long story and a long journey, which is the science of reading, which some of you will have ideas about and knowledge of. So from there, in the last few years, I've moved into a role where I'm supporting students with varying needs, complex needs. And alongside that, we've had to put in, that a lot of the recommendations are social stories, using visuals, making sure you've got a visual timetable. So alongside that, one of the programs I came across was Boardmaker. So I've sort of played with Boardmaker now for maybe 2 years on and off. And so I've used it in a range of ways. But it's always sort of seen as an additional thing that we should be using to include. That we use Boardmaker for your Tier 3 kids. But what I found when I was using Boardmaker, when I was tutoring students, the very first thing that I noticed really worked was using a visual schedule. So I thought I'd show you this. This is the daily homework schedule that I use for a child that's learning to read. So it's not for somebody who is non-verbal, or actually she does have a complex learning needs, but it may not be everything that was on your list there, Kate. She is hearing impaired and has attention difficulties, I think, as a result of that. And she's very young, so who knows? That's why I think it's complex. We might find more things out as we go. But having a schedule like this for her, she knows exactly what to do. And one of the things that was on her NDIS goal was to get better at her social conversations. So we added session 1 here that said, so this isn't it, and I don't have it on me, start your session with greetings. So she would come in and say, right, it's time to say hello. And I say hello, and she'd say, right, can we do that? Because I get my reward once I've said hello, because she gets a little tick. So it just goes to show automatically how quick and effective using something like this works. So this is one of the things I use it for. But lately, I've been moving towards using it for teaching phonics and teaching reading at a Tier 1 level, actually Tier 1, but including Tier 1, 2, and 3. So I want to give you an example of what that looks like when we're talking about teaching reading. So we know when we go to teach reading, we have to teach children how to read words. And when we teach children how to read words, there's many different approaches. So if you're using a whole language approach, they're more likely to teach you using the 100 most used words list plus predictables. If you're using a science of reading approach, you will be looking at a sequence of phonics and words that go alongside that support it, as well as some high frequency words, but they tend to be less. So the issue with that is sometimes, and this is like looking at it from the lens of what I've observed over the last 20 years, is the problem with the 100 words or the 200 words or the 300 words is not the words in itself, it's the way they were taught.
Can I jump in? I want to ask, can I have a hands up? Who knows what on earth the 100 words are?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4. Steph and Kelly, can you do virtual hands up to let me know if you know what on earth we're talking about?
Sorry, I do, but my video is not working for some reason. I can't get it to work. Sorry.
Steph, you know?
What did you say? Sorry, I just got back.
That's okay. Jacinta's talking about the 100 words that kids are often given, the M100 words.
Like the first 100 words?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Okay, good. Jacinta, some of the people here are secondary.
And I don't know how many people are here. Is it 10?
3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 plus you and me. So it's
okay,
a little group tonight.
Okay, cool. Sorry. Okay, so if you get to the end of prep and you don't have 100 words, I think you're behind. You really need to be able to have those first 100. But most programs don't include the first 100 words, which means that sometimes it looks like we're going a little bit slower when we're doing the science of reading. And there's an element of truth to that, okay? Because we really do need them to be able to read and write words. So they're not just doing decodables, they're getting out there and they're having a go at any words. And they're using the words for writing as well. Because otherwise, when they go to write, they're limited with how many words they can actually write. So most programs will give you, for example, say, and I'm now going to move you into, say that kids know the whole alphabet. And I'll just show you with this. So here, I'm assuming prior knowledge here. This is the alphabet. Can anyone tell me how many letters there are in the alphabet? Yeah, correct. I saw somebody with grade 26. Nearly every child I work with who is dyslexic cannot tell me that. The next thing would be, can you tell me the alphabet? Nearly every single child who tries to tell me the alphabet cannot tell me the alphabet in sequence. Okay, so also that's an issue. They usually leave out the letters N. That's always, they leave that out. And by the time they get here, this could be anything. Okay, so that's as a FYI. So this is the alphabet. The alphabetic principle is that these letters represent sounds, and we use these letters. This letter A can represent more than one sound. In fact, it can have up to 5. And the letter C can have 2 sounds. G has 2 sounds. And then we need to look at the alphabet and say which letters do not go on the end of words. And that would be I, J, U, V, and Q. So all of this work is prerequisite before you move into this is sh, okay? Because if they don't know this, they can't, it's hard to move on to this. So I'm expecting that a lot of work has already been done on the alphabet, knowing the alphabet, sequencing the alphabet, and knowing that letters represent sounds, and letters can represent more than one. If we're teaching in the science of reading the simple code, the simple code would be A says A before you move on to anything beyond that. The complex code would be that A says A, or O. So that's the difference between the simple and complex. So what I found for using Boardmaker is that children with complex needs, and now I'm talking about children from prep and beyond. So if I get a child in year 1, 2, or 3 that is having reading difficulties, by the time you've taught them all of this, there's half a term potentially gone by the time they come to you, because there's a lot of knowledge and practice and handwriting that needs to be done here. And then you've got to get to this. So you're already behind, and in order to accelerate, they need to do this quite often, and you need a team to get this to happen once a week or twice a week or 3 times a week is still not enough. They really need daily. But what happens is, if I was to give them this and say, this says sh, okay? It has the letter S and H, and it represents a sound sh, okay? You'll see this in a lot of words. Does anybody here know what the rule is with the sh sound and this grapheme? Okay, so there's a rule with this grapheme that you use this at the beginning or end of a base word. Okay, so in a word like shop, you hear it at the beginning, and in a word like wish, you hear it at the end. You sometimes hear in 2 syllable words like finish. But if I talked about a word like communication or concussion, you would not use this because it is not at the beginning or the end of the base word. Okay, so that's really helpful to teach from the get-go. Because if I was going to do it through the speech to print, I would then say, listen to these words and listen to the words and tell me if they're at the beginning or the end. All right. Now, a child with complex needs would not be able to do that for me because they would not be able to sit still and focus and concentrate long enough. But quite often children I get with intellectual disabilities, they can actually read the word really quickly without sequencing the sounds, but they cannot tell me anything about the word and what it means. So if you were to talk about the science of reading and say, we can't use picture prompts, because that is true, we should not be using picture prompts in a predictable text. That is not what I'm doing here. If I was to introduce this word, this sound, and say it's in the word she. So I'm not asking a child to predict what this word means. I am then using this in a sequence of teaching that's actually really helpful for all. It's not just for a child with a complex learning profile, in my opinion. All kids look at this and go, oh, these are good. So what happens with this is when I'm teaching, I look at it from a model of explicit instruction, which is that gradual release. So that whatever I do first has to be as good as I possibly can get it to be, which is my best model. And after I have had my best model, I move to coaching. Okay, so this is a model and I'm modeling this word. Can you see that is at the beginning of the word she? And now I'm going to talk, I might say, Kate, I was talking to Kate today and she invited me to come here. So the word she replaces Kate's name, okay, in that context. So now I'm using it and I'm explaining the meaning of the word as well, depending on the child that I'm working with. So I've created this so that you can teach the phonics, teach the meaning at the same time, and not just teach what we call in language content words. Okay, a content word is a noun or a verb because she is a high frequency word and it's a pronoun and it's used very often, and we want children to be using this word. So I've mixed it up by using the high frequency words to teach sh. Okay, so I've got she, I've got, now I'll go backwards. I've got flush, finish, which I would teach in syllables, fin-ish, finish for segmenting and blending, and shut, and I've got fresh. Okay, so by doing this, I have an opportunity to observe whether they understand the meaning of these words, which is exactly what happened today when I took this concept and did it on an app. So I want to show you how it looks on the app now. And this was a child who's very, very quickly disengaged.
I've given you sharing rights for the meeting, Jacinta. If you've got it on the computer you're on, you can share the share screen.
Okay. So sometimes with speech to print, we might take a sound like A, and we might tell you that A can be represented many different ways. And I'm going to try and share now with you. I'm going to share my iPad with you. And I'm sharing it through QuickTime, not through the iPad. It just might mean I can see. Okay. So, and I'll show you, I've got a thrust chart on here. So I'll show you what I mean by that. I've done the thrust training. So I find this is a helpful tool. I don't teach thrust, but I do find this tool really helpful. So you can see in the top box on the top row, the second box in has the A sound, and we've got 4 graphemes there. There's actually 8 graphemes that represent A. So this is reduced and helpful to see that these are the 4 ways. You could teach the A sound and teach these 4 graphemes for some children. By the time I think kids get to school and you've worked out that they are finding reading hard, they're already working with print. So a speech to print would take the speech sound and show you the print. I do that when I need to, but I also do print to speech. And this activity that I'm showing you here is a print to speech. And it says stop the activity, so I'll start it again. This is the letter U, and it has three sounds. It's actually got more than 3 sounds, but we'll start with 3. And I make that really clear when I'm teaching this. I'll say, we're going to learn 3 of the sounds this letter can make. The first sound is up, as in up. The next one is U, as in music. And the third one is put, as in put. And then we have all the words underneath. And I'm not asking the child at this point to read the words. I'm asking them to listen, and I will read them. So I will say, in the first box, the word is us. Can you hear you, or in the word us? Then the child will listen and say, And I'll say, thank you. Now drag up into the first box. So they will drag it. Okay, so that was the activity that I did with the child today. And the first time we did it, it took quite some time. It took him, I don't know, it felt like a good 5 minutes. The second time he absolutely flew through it. And that child is grade 3, ASD, anxiety, and dyslexic. And I'm sure that that's a complex profile already. And he looks at this and he's like a duck to water when I put this in front of him, because it's got all the visuals, and you can add the voice in as well. And it's teaching him how to read, it's teaching him the phonics. But actually every child I give this to, it's helpful. It's really helpful to do this activity. So then we go through and we sort them. And then we talk about, and he actually said, I don't know that word, tulip, in the middle there. So we explored quick Google of what a tulip is. And he said to me, I know what a user is. I'm a user when I log into Roblox. And I said, that's correct. You are a user when you do that, and you put in your user name. So because there's a visual to go with it, even though I'm asking the child to listen to the sounds as an initial model, I get to learn what the child knows. It's engaging, it's connecting. And I also get to find out what they don't know. For example, what I learned from this is this child had no idea what unit was. And he's in grade 3. In a mainstream school, absolutely no idea. So even though I was teaching reading here, what I found from doing this activity is A, he really likes it. B, I have a subscription and he can log in and do this again at home, and the family then know what to do. And C, I can take the activity and say, as a responsive approach, now I need to do some work on vocabulary and language, even though the main goal was the speech sounds. So I diverted my lesson and I took things from here, like a whiteboard rubber, some glue, with a ruler. We got some jars of lollies out the back, and I laid them all out and I said, we're going to explore a unit of weight, being grams and kilograms. But first I want you just to pick everything up and put them in order from lightest to heaviest, which the child did. And then I said to him, a unit is, we could measure these in grams or kilograms. And then I said, how much do you weigh? And he said, I'm 35 and 36. And I said, 36 what? And he didn't know. He didn't know he was 35 kilograms. And I said, he would be 35 kilograms. So then I went back to the materials and said, would you measure this in grams or kilograms? And we went through, and then eventually he could see and he could work it out. And then we looked at the ruler and said that would be centimeters and meters, or millimeters, I mean. And when we were talking, I said, you have told me the number. The number is 10, and the unit is centimeters. So there was no, unless we had done that lesson, this idea of him knowing what a unit was would have gone completely, there wouldn't be that lesson now. I mean, there is a lesson, but it wouldn't be broken down to that level, I think, in a classroom, because it would be assumed knowledge that children know what units are. And because we had all the materials to do that, and he didn't, I wouldn't have known to use Boardmaker in the way I'm using it now. And I think using something like this to teach reading and to teach phonics is a way that can not only teach the phonics, but it can also, I'll stop sharing, it also integrates it into language, into vocabulary, and into social skills, because you're having a conversation and you're having a discussion. And when you have the cards, so if I was to pull out these cards I have here and then add a few more in, So I've got my SH, I've got my TH, I've got my E. I can give them to a group and say sort them. So then they have the conversations and I observe, and then I just facilitate and intervene only if I need to. And really, when I facilitate, I will be doing two things: reinforcing phonic knowledge, but also reinforcing social skills, because conversation and collaboration is even more important now for children, given that they haven't had that for a couple of years. So I hope that helps. As if you have any questions, I have not got any time. I've actually got a student now.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I just realised it was 5:30.
That's okay. Thank you. Go teach your student.
Thanks so much,
so much
Kate.
for joining us, Jacinta.
All right.
Okay.
You can
See
ask
you.
questions and I'll answer later.
Okay,
Bye.
everybody, if you've got questions for Jacinta, please pop them into the chat and I'll email them.
Thanks a lot. Okay, bye now.
All right, so in an ideal world, I would have been able to set some background scene before that presentation. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go through that background information and then we're going to discuss how we might be able to use things like BoardMaker in ways that we haven't necessarily used them before. So hands up who's used BoardMaker or other pictograph kind of. So 1, 2, 3 of you, and 4 with no cameras on. So you may be waving frantically at me and I'm not sure. So some of you, I think it's fair to say. All right, I'm going to go back to my slides. Okay. So tonight we're going to focus on kids with complex communication needs. And who are these people? They are people with some kind of speech, language, or communication impairment that is what some people would call severe. They might be able to speak but have difficulty comprehending or expressing their wants and needs, or they might not be able to speak at all, and they might use gestures or behaviours like pointing and using technology. Yes, Robert.
Would this include a student who was selectively mute in school contexts due to anxiety?
Yes, absolutely. Difficulty with communicating. So complex communication needs are less around naming the kind of thing going on to create this and more about the manifestation. Difficulty communicating is two-way. Difficulty in getting information in or out. So receptive and expressive communication. Any other questions while we're here? No? Okay. Has anybody worked with students in their class who use alternative communication, gesture and so forth? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yep.
Okay, so more of you this time. Okay. Now, share button. Now, the reason I'm focusing on kids with communication difficulties and AAC use is because there's pretty strong evidence that practice isn't ideal at scale, if you like. So there's pockets of good practice. That good practice might be your classroom, but at a system level, at a school system level, practice is not ideal. So it's for these students that I'm going to be using tonight as a case example of the principles of interprofessional collaboration. But we're going to do a little bit more example of a little bit more focused investigation of these kids first. So Biggs and Hacker note that everyday practice for these kids hasn't measured up to the evidence base. So just because research suggests what should be happening doesn't mean it is happening. There's evidence, in fact, that their needs continue to be unmet for a good portion of the time, or that AAC might be there but poorly implemented, meaning that students may have a device, but they may lack meaningful access to that device. So I thought I might give you a couple of examples that I've seen and come across where there's a device, but it belongs to the school. It has to stay at the school, or vice versa. There's a device, but it has to stay at home. This has often arisen around things like NDIS funding. NDIS doesn't fund things for school. So there's been poor understanding or poor communication, for example, between the members of a team around what that device can do. Other examples that I've seen are devices being put in cupboards because they're fragile or as a punishment if a child is playing a game on a device, or schools or teachers that say, no, in this classroom, we only use this device. So those are the ones I've been exposed to. Let's have a stop and a bit of a share. What about other people? What kinds of things can mean that a kid's access to a device means that it's not meaningful? There's something interrupting. Are there systemic pressures, funding pressures, practice pressures? Jess?
Sometimes I find, I love ES, they're awesome, but sometimes I find the ES's capabilities to use some of these devices are quite low. So I've got a student using LAMP at the moment, and it's quite complex, but it's good. And they say, oh, why can't they just use their words they can speak? And we have that conversation that, well, more than one communication is ideal. And that's the preferred communication that's made from the speech and the parent. So we've got to respect that choice.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So the fabulous point. The preferences of the child are paramount here. It's the child's communication system. So preferences of therapists, parents, teachers, ES staff, psychs, you know what I mean? There's many people in the mix for these teams. It's the child's preference. And can anyone tell me who is the clinician, who's the specialist in matching the kid to the device? Who does that?
Speechy.
Yep,
Yeah.
Speechies.
Can I share?
Yes, sorry, Kelly, yes.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what's going on with my camera.
Okay.
We've got a little girl who's in year 7 that mum's, when we had the SSG when she was in grade 6, mum didn't want to use the communication device in year 7 because of the anxiety, enough anxiety around transition, because she doesn't want to use it. So she didn't want it, but there to be a battle. And so mum said, my goal for her is to transition happily to high school. And then my communication with the primary school said that mum doesn't really care if she uses it or not, so she's not pushing it. Yeah, but what we found out is we've had this little girl in a tier 2 reading program, and she can actually do a hell of a lot more than what we knew she could. So now she's actually starting to do the sounds of each letter. And so she's had an aid all the time, but never actually has had intervention with language development, which is really odd.
So that's another issue, is presumption of low competence or incompetence. Always presume competence, always presume competence. So there's, low expectations. We see a general trend where the more complex people's, learning needs and communication needs are, the lower the presumption their achievement or their capability is. But in fact, what we are much more likely to be looking at is the length of time that exposure to good teaching takes. So the kinds of things that Jacinta was talking about before, and that model of gradual release from I do, we do, you do. Instead of I do, we do, you do, it'll be I do, we do, we do, we do, we do, we do. You know what I mean? It just stretches out a lot more as the kid gets exposure to models. So the research is quite clear, Kelly, that ASE devices develop language for kids. And what I mean by developing language, I don't mean necessarily mouth words and oral language, but language. It increases their vocabulary, it increases their background information about things, it increases their skills in two-way communication. It is their voice. So
can I just add, she spoke through her device at the grade 6 graduation, and that was the first time the kids at her primary school had heard her voice, essentially. And everyone cried. Like it was such a moment. A beautiful, she could actually get what she was thinking, and yet still mum's not pushing to use it. So, but
this is why interprofessional collaboration is key, and it involves families. So we're talking about the whole team. So interprofessional collaboration essentially asks the different professionals that work with a child, but the parent is the conduit. It might be the parent who's gained the funding, it might be the parent who's brought in the outside speechy, but so having the parent on the team is essential to have seamless use across settings. If you've got one device at school and another device at home, you have not got seamless use across settings. And you're asking a child for whom learning is more difficult than it is for other kids to work with more complexity than you are asking of other kids. So that seamlessness is essential. Has anybody else got good examples of that where seamlessness has not occurred for maybe that or other reasons? Yes, Suzanne.
We'd have a child come to school and her Dynavox wouldn't be charged. So she wouldn't be able to say good morning or all that, you know, which we were trying to get her, one of the main things to do, good morning and answer the roll and everything, because we'd be charging it. The mother would always just forget.
Okay. So it's there, you've got a family who are using it. They're probably draining the battery using it, but there's not that priority. No, they're not. Oh, okay. That's sad. Any other examples? Yes, Bronwyn.
So we have kids from EEP up to year 12 at our school. And we do find that some of the families, particularly of the younger children, don't want any augmented communication systems because then they think my child won't talk. They won't learn to talk if they're relying on their device the whole time.
Yeah. So values and attitudes, and sometimes they're the, you know, we've heard before, sometimes it's the values and attitudes of support staff. Sometimes it's the values and attitudes of parents. And I think that it's important for us to work from a place of understanding with all people, that with greater conversation between the members of the team, we can build that knowledge and we can shift people a little. And I think in Bronwyn's case, Bronwyn, I'm assuming the kind of conversations you have with these parents are around, well, what constitutes talking?
Yeah, and we've actually, that's probably an example from a few years ago. And over the last few years, we have had a really big communication push, and our speeches have done lots of work with families and parents and everything, which I wrote about in the collaboration thing. So
fantastic. So yes, I've read your one, but I haven't had a chance to write back yet. So yeah, that's a really lovely example of the school, the educators, the allied health team and the parents working as a team, even at the level of the school itself. So the schools ask the speechies to do en masse more communication and build that understanding. All right. I'm going to add a final one in. I often hear that teaching kids with complex communication needs in regular education classrooms isn't possible, and it's absolutely possible. It's absolutely possible. You know, we've all given some great examples here from a range of settings, but they could have happened anywhere. So support has to be seamless across the settings in which a child lives. A child exists in an ecology. And the Biggs and Hacker reading drew on a well-known kind of theoretical model in education called the bioecological systems theory. And it's like an onion with the child at the centre. And the next layer that surrounds a child is the microsystem. It's the most proximal layer to a child. So it's their family, their peers, their school, or maybe they're in daycare, or the kids they see in the playground. Okay, so it's that very close frequent interaction. They're in each other's worlds very much. Surrounding that, there's this kind of mesosystem. Surrounding that is an ecosystem. And so that's things that are not so proximal to the child. The school board, for example, or some kind of government agency. So the agency is interacting with the parent and the child, but there's multiple layers in between the child and, say, that government agency. All right, so there's still a lot of interaction, but it's mediated by that layer in the middle. And then beyond that, there's the attitudes and ideologies of the culture. We've talked extensively in this course around a very pervasive culture of low expectations in our society of people with disabilities, a presumption that they can't do meaningful, properly paid work. You know what I mean? They can't go on to further study, live independently, have valuable relationships with their community and so on. So it's around, this article draws people's attentions to all the parts of the ecosystem and how they interact with each other. And I've thrown a couple of examples from the reading in here. So that microsystem, the influence on, in this article, they were talking about the outcomes from intervention. So the influence, as we've all just heard, family attitudes, all right, like valuing AAC or not. family actions like remembering to charge it at night. And sometimes this is related to family background. It might be cultural. There might be, you know, this family might be deeply religious or from a culture where there's a sense of shame, that disabilities are kind of judgment on you. Or it might be that there's a deep sense of anxiety in this family. You know, everybody knows that, you know, Auntie Maud never learned to talk and now we're worried it's happening again. So there might be anxiety around those family elements. Then there's the student factors, their competence in communication, the kind of system they've got in place, what their kind of individual differences are. Jacinta said before, you might have a kid who's also deaf or dyslexic, as well as a child who's non-speaking. Then there's those mesosystem levels, the kind of the things that influence and mediate the exosystem and the microsystem, the views of staff, the competence of staff, the kind of partnership there is between the schools. So Bronwyn's example of, you know, building that stronger partnership actually shifted the outcomes for those kids. And then there's the exosystem layer. So what kind of access there is to the AAC? What kind of school system are they in? Is this a school system that funds and supports this? What kind of professional learning? Jess brought up the knowledge of ES staff. Are you in a system where there's professional learning provided for ES staff? So you can see how all these layers that spiral outwards from a child can impact an intervention being run for that child. So I don't think I needed to put this up because we've already heard this, but I'm going to just go over it anyway. Some of the attitudes that I've heard over my more than 2 decades in teaching is from teachers around AAC is, I can't do this. I can't do this, or I don't know how to do this. Or I'm not going to do that just for one student. Or using that technology isn't applicable to what I'm teaching. It's not possible. It's someone else's job. This should be done by someone else, somewhere else, because what about all my other students? The idea that this intrudes. And we find that we can shift this with exposure to good practice. And we find that we can get good, not just better knowledge, but good practice that's informed by professional learning, collaboration, building good trusting relationships between the home and the school and the clinicians. So that's how you get seamless support and practice across the tiers. And the reason I asked Jacinta to come in was because it was a lovely example. Hang on, I just can't see my stop share button. It was a lovely example of how Boardmaker came from the AAC world. It was around providing visuals for students who do not speak. And yet Jacinta's using it for tier 3 intervention in a way that could absolutely be done in any classroom on any day. And the reason I asked her to come in was to show you how she's teaching children decoding sounds and sound blends by using the visuals from Boardmaker. And I wanted to draw your attention to that so that it would completely normalise the use of the kinds of AAC technologies that are in a classroom. It would make the process very accessible to children who do use AAC, but it would have reciprocal benefits for all the children in there who don't use AAC. Suzanne, I can see you nodding away, and I happen to know a bit about your school, so I suspect you've seen this in action before. I'm interested in your thoughts or reflections on what you saw Jacinta presenting.
When I was working as an aide, I kept saying to the teachers, can you use the Boardmaker the pictures and integrate them into part of the lesson so that and have them up on the board, or have because one of the children, she was just using her eyes, so if you had them up on the board, she could just quickly look to the left and then you've got a yes, or quickly look to the left, you know, and different words up there that other kids could use as well, but then she could communicate just by looking up at the board. But you could just have if the kids are using the Boardmaker pictures to learn to read and their sounds and blending, then they're familiar with them. So then communicating then with an AAC user or someone with a pod book or anything, it's easier for them because they'll quickly recognize the pictures. So then they can chat and talk. It just makes communication easier as well, I think.
Yep. And it kind of normalizes it. you know, anybody else? Anyone have any experience doing something like this, using something a bit similar? Any reflections on what you've seen? Chelsea.
This is probably like a little thing, but it's been a massive win for us this term, even though we're only 2 days in. We've just got access to Boardmaker, which is really exciting. And from the start of next year, every classroom will have a Boardmaker done timetable that's consistent for my little man that uses it in prep at the moment, moving into whatever classroom he happens to wander into. So we're starting to roll out whole school visuals, which has been a massive win.
That is a massive win. And I remember you saying to me that all the hard work and effort that you'd put in was seen by leadership as something special and fabulous that you'd done, but they wouldn't ask other people to do it. And yet here we are, we're now getting that slow shift and that slow win. And I'm often reminded of, do you remember the Scarlett Finney video that we all watched about that early disability discrimination case? And the school said in the courts that they didn't want to enrol her because it was going to mean a lot of work and investment for them for one student. And it's a really short-sighted view to presume that A, they would never teach another student with a wheelchair, or you know what I mean? Or that B, the kinds of ramps and doorway widening that they might put in wouldn't benefit other people in other ways. And Chelsea, that's a really lovely example. And congratulations, because I know that win belongs to you. Well done. Anyone else? Any thoughts and reflections? Was this a new application that you saw of ASE? Was this new information? Has anyone not really been exposed to this before? That's very heartening for me to hear. Did it confirm or challenge any kind of ways that you use it in your classroom? Deafening silence. Okay. So what would it look like in a classroom if you had this up and running? And I've got a video on Moodle, but I thought I'd share it for us now. So this is a student with, you know, very complex learning profile, who has, who's an AAC user and who's in the classroom getting some kind of grammar lesson at, I'd say middle school level. So let me just get my sharing settings right.
So do you want to hear the whole story again?
I went to school on Friday. I rode the bus. The bus I rode was number 8. I rode the bus with Mary. I rode the bus with Susie. I rode the bus with Jason. I read a book. Susie played video games. Jason played video games. Mary played video games. We rode the bus. So we rode the bus for 40 minutes. We got bored. We felt sleepy. We arrived at the school. We ate breakfast. We had a good day. Or I hope we have.
So how are you guys gonna start?
We're gonna start at the beginning of the sentence. Combining first. Yeah.
So is Trisha gonna start reading that I write, and we discuss, and then we'll give it to Ned, or is Natalie gonna start writing? Are we writing? Okay.
Okay.
Why'd you guys look at it?
I went to school on Friday. I rode the bus. The bus I rode was number 8. So the first two are kind of repeating themselves. I went to school on Friday. Those two are repeating themselves. What do you want to do with it? Is it a series? Do you want to put it into a series, convention, or is another one? Okay. Or hitting or. I went to school or on Friday. Oh, series. So we put I went to school, comma. on Friday. Like that? Yeah. That seem right? Or would it be I went to school on Friday? And the other would be another.
Extra words there.
I think you're serious.
Like, I feel like there's something. Because remember, you can only combining two, look at in the three, which is actually got things or more.
Oh, so
So,
not serious.
what do you think, Natalie? Give us some
I think it was
between the two of you guys can come up with a good way.
I think it would be on the another way. Because we could say I went to school on Friday. Or on Friday I went to school.
Like those?
Okay, so which one do you want? This one for I went to school on Friday, and this one for on Friday I went to school. Which one? This one? So I went to school on Friday. Okay.
So what did we see happening here? Who were all these people and what was happening? Yes, Robert.
I assume that the girl sitting next to her was a classmate, and I assume that they were probably friends. But I also wonder whether it's an example of split groupings where you're helping the student because they're helping teach a concept. So it could also be a student who needs extending. That's helping her. That's also friendly towards her.
And we know that that student pairing often works very well that way, because when you have to teach a concept and something complex like the difference between, you know, a series, but you know what I mean, the difference between using commas, using ands and so on, it's sophisticated work. It's one thing to be able to do it in your writing. It's another to be able to articulate and explain the choices. So I think you might be right. So who were the other people? What was going on there? Jess?
The lady next to her was the aide, and the teacher was floating. And I liked that the aide didn't do the speaking and let the collaboration peer collaboration happen. And so instead of the aide saying, "Oh, do you want? Is this what I'm going to write down?" the student was prompting that, and the learning was happening between the students, and the aide was doing the byproduct of the learning. And I thought that was really good.
I did too. And it also made me think about what Jacinta said before, which is sometimes you're actually teaching a social skill at the same time. So you may well have, this student may well have been working on pointing, gesture, do you know what I mean? Making choice making. We have no idea what level of the curriculum she's working at, but we can see that there was effective choice making, turn taking, communicating of decisions, editing of decisions. Do I like that one? Actually, no, I don't. Do you know what I mean? There was a lot going on there. Without that knowing the adjustments that are put in place for this student, and without knowing what was in the lesson plan, we actually can't tell. We can just see a writing lesson involving grammar choices. So sometimes visuals can be like Jacinta showed, they could be board maker, or it could be words. They could be making choices between words. I think it's also possible that the person in the background was the speechy. It may have been the teacher, it may not have. I'm going to revisit Kelly's conversation from earlier in this unit where she said, we're having difficulty scheduling a time and a place for the speechies to see the students. And I said, why don't you put them in the classrooms? And Kelly, I thought I'd revisit that choice now and say, can you see what a speech session might look like in a classroom embedded in an academic activity now?
Sort of. I'm not convinced though. I think a lot of the stigma with even aides working with kids in high school is sometimes kids love them and want them to sit next to them. We always say as a first thing to move around the classroom and work with, you know, multiple kids so that kids don't feel singled out. But I'm still not there with thinking speechy in the classroom. I just don't think our classrooms are set up well. However, we're building a new building and we're having rooms parallel put on the side. So hopefully that's a better alternative.
one of the things that you and I are going to get to know each other very well over the next 2 years, Kelly. You're going to do a lot of units with me. And one of the things that we're going to look at is effective use of teaching assistants in classrooms. And so having the ES staff sit with a kid is not ideal practice. In fact, the ES staff are there to support the teacher. And so they are there to free up the teacher. So if the teacher is doing things like writing instructions on the board, going around and checking where people are up to, things like that, that work is actually best done by the ES. It's the teacher who should be working with the kid who's struggling with understanding something. So there's no stigma in that. And the other, I would say, is the same with the speechy. So the speechy can come in and work like in a co-teaching model with a teacher. So you don't park them next to a kid. Now, in the case with this girl in the wheelchair, I don't think there's any hiding the fact that she has a complex communication disability. And so there's no stigma in having people surround her and assisting her making choices, because that's necessary work in this instance. But you can think more creatively around how you deploy people in the classroom. All right, any other reflections, comments or thoughts on that video? Is that something you can see yourself doing? Can you see an activity where you might be able to do that? Or where you do? Bronwyn, I'm assuming that's your bread and butter.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, we have those sorts of things happening in most lessons most of the time, and our kids will often help each other with their devices if they need help, and they do collaborate, the ones that can.
Excellent. All right. Let me go back. All right, so what I'd like you to do now, so the Biggs and Hacker article drew on that, oh, hang on, I can't see you all. Let me just try the sharing. I have to untick a box from the video. Here we go. The Biggs and Hacker article drew attention to a number of barriers and facilitators that influence outcomes for students who use AAC. I'm going to give you 10 minutes now to work in pairs or groups of 3, depending on how many people I end up having now. And I want you to talk about, first of all, what were the barriers? What were the facilitators that they identified as influencing positive outcomes for students? And then I want you to have a little go at coming up with some examples of how those either barriers or facilitators apply in your setting. And I want you to take a critical eye, and by that I don't mean I want you to find flaw. What I mean is I want you to think critically about what are the strengths and what are the areas that could be improved in your setting in relation to those barriers and facilitators. So let's have a go. Do you want me to paste the instructions into the chat so you can see them all when you're in your groups? All right. Okay, here they are in the chat. All right, creating the breakout rooms. You have 10 minutes to undertake this activity, and this will be useful because you'll get time soon to create your responses on Moodle. All right, we'll just let people come back.
Chelsea, we forgot to tell you you're doing the talking.
Thanks.
You do facilitator and I'll do barriers, deal?
Okay.
Ambushed. I saw that, Jess. Just remember, I'm grading your assignments.
Take it back. Give me an adjustment.
All right. Now, I didn't manage to get to visit all of the breakout rooms. Jennifer, I didn't make it to yours. I'd like you to tell me some. Are you the spokesperson? Have I messed up the order of speaking?
Yes, actually, Christy is going to chat.
Okay, Christy.
What we had a conversation about, yeah.
All right, Christy, what did this article talk about in terms of barriers and facilitators?
Okay, so Jennifer and I are going to put a disclaimer. We weren't able to read the whole article in preparation for today's class, but we kind of had a quick look through anyway, and tried to find the right information for our contexts. We both, in terms of barriers and looking at the meso system, so some of those home factors that kind of can put barriers up for students. We both have issues with parents kind of being the barrier for some of our learners. The fact that for some parents not wanting to, I suppose, admit that their child is struggling at school, and so not allowing us to, or not enabling us to put in some strategies in place for the child, which then kind of has those ramifications in future for allowing the child not only to learn at their current stage and where they are. So Jennifer's in primary and I'm in the upper secondary. So, I kind of said that those kind of decisions in not implementing anything early on can have dire consequences up at my end and the senior end when a student has so many gaps in their literacy and numeracy skills that they kind of get to 11 and 12 and they are so far behind, the rest of their cohorts. I suppose there's those kinds of like home factors and those kind of ideologies of parents.
And you're so right. If we don't get it right in the start, like I remember hearing Pam Snow talk about that in the relation to teaching reading, and she said it's like it's why reading's like a rocket ship, but I'd say it's why AAC is also like a rocket ship. If it's an inch off at the base, it's a mile out in space. You know what I mean? By the time they've got to high school, the gap is so huge that it can feel insurmountable. You'll be backfilling and closing gaps until they leave, and you may never get there. So getting this right early is paramount. Thank you. Did you get to facilitators?
Just briefly, Jennifer mentioned that she her school implements teacher aids and there's speeches as well, but they don't work in the classrooms with students. And at my school, we actually don't have any teachers aids, and all of any students at my school who need allied health professional help need to source that privately and independently.
All right, Jennifer, I'm going to make you talk. I'm sorry. So tell me about that. So your speeches use a withdrawal model, is that correct?
Yes, they do. Yes.
Okay.
The speech therapists make times to take the children out of the classroom and do their assessments and work with the children. The integration aids, they also generally take the children outside their classroom and they use and work with the children, doing completely different curriculum to what's happening in the classroom.
Okay, I fervently hope that by the end of your degree, you have some language and evidence and you can get a little bit of a shift there.
Yes.
That would be a really cool accomplishment, Jennifer.
Yes, trying to shift views at my school. It's not always easy. And I think it really needs to sort of start from leadership as well. And
so it does.
In terms of not having this whole inclusion or inclusive education tokenistic, and actually really understanding what it means. But unfortunately,
you mean like not having a separate room called the inclusion room, don't you?
Well, I actually teach reading recovery, so I guess I'm one of those culprits that take children out of the class.
No. To be clear, there are reasons to take children out of classrooms for structured intervention. It has to be time limited and it has to be based on data, and the interventions have to be evidence-based. So in a multi-tiered system of support, there's often some misunderstanding around that. No, the inclusion room reference was, it's the room where the disabled kids go or where the naughty kids go in some mainstream schools. That was my joke when you said something about making sure it's not tokenistic. All right, let's hear from Suzanne. Who were you in a group with? Suzanne B.
With Chelsea and Jess.
All right. What would you like to share about barriers and facilitators?
Chelsea's going to not unmute there. We were talking about the AAC devices and the barriers being the choosing the best fit for the student, what best suits their needs, and just the barriers of taking devices across different environments. So we were discussing going to PE and things like that. So the transition, and obviously the transition from home to school, and ensuring that, number one, they're brought to school, but they're charged, they're safely transported and things like that. Teacher training and teacher hesitation to use devices and feeling apprehensive or unsure of how to use it in their classroom. And then the facilitators being the growing use of devices and the expansive things that are out there for students to choose and families to choose, and that they're becoming more cost effective.
And I think the funding arrangements are becoming clearer. I think the poor understanding of NDIS, look, there are still some lingering, poor understandings, and goodness knows the NDIS has been in a bit of a mess for a while, but I think people are starting to understand better that things like an NDIS funded device can go from home to school. It doesn't have to stay home. No, the NDIS police aren't going to, stand at the school gate and pluck it out of anyone's hand. But there were some anxieties, particularly in the earlier days.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to add?
Girls, if you've got anything else?
Did you miss anything, Jess or Chelsea?
No, you did a great job. I think one of the good little conversations we had just in our little group was about the environments and the device going from not just home to school, but within school, I think was something that we had a good discussion about. I know for some of my little cherubs, this is an experience we've had. Home to classroom is super consistent. Classroom to specialist has not been as consistent because they've found it more difficult to apply that in settings like PE or performing arts. So we're working through that.
And that's where quality PL is paramount. So it's not just having an AAC specialist come in and help you in the classroom do it. It's what does that look like in PE? What does that look like in swimming? What does that look like in all the environments? I have to tell you, there's a Facebook group. I lurk in Facebook groups to learn a lot. And there's a fabulous Facebook group called Ask Me Anything. I'm an AAC user. And its purpose is for people to be able to ask questions. And there's a 24-hour rule so that only people who use AAC can answer in the first 24 hours, because sometimes it takes those people a considerable amount of time to, produce a response. And so the group rule is AAC user voices first and foremost. So you can jump on there and say, hey, I teach, in a primary school. Can anyone, my kid uses a Toby or whatever the device is. Can anyone suggest a robust waterproof case for it, or whatever the question is? There's an amazing community in there. All right. Anybody else feel that anything hasn't been discussed from the reading about the barriers and the facilitators? Robert, what have we missed?
So one part that I took from the reading was when they were talking about it's both a potential barrier, but also a potential leverage, is around the school staff and their views about students, because that comes down to the idea of collective efficacy, which has been shown to be one of the strongest drivers of student success for all students, even above individuals' teacher competency, which I think is staggering. But I think it also is why sometimes we see amazing results from graduates who are full of passion and belief, that makes up for their not yet developed experience, which makes them a fantastic asset to have in teams.
It does. And the fact that they've never seen it before is in the same pile as they've never seen anything before. So it's great.
Yeah.
They don't come with
graduates.
Yeah, they don't have hugely preconceived ideas about that's not the way I do things, because they don't yet have a way of doing things. Yeah,
I haven't always done something a certain way.
Yes, absolutely. Attitudes sit, behind so much of what we've talked about. It's the attitudes of families if they're resistant, or it's the attitudes of teachers if they're hesitant, or if, you know what I mean? But all of these, as I said at the beginning, can be worked on from a place of understanding and compassion. If a parent is reluctant, there's usually fear or anxiety. So talk to them. Find a non-threatening place with a pot plant and a cup of tea and, make sure it's a nice place. and have a conversation and have another conversation, because you can usually develop a relationship of trust by talking, and you can usually work through that. And if a child ends up in Christy's senior high school class never having had AAC, then it doesn't matter how long you delay the acquisition of AAC to develop the relationship of trust with the parent to get there. Because if they're never going to get it, you know what I mean? It's worth investing in that relationship. You're not delaying, you're buying future time. Invest in that relationship. Yes, Jess.
Just on that barriers too, it's important to, through reading and thinking about cultural competency, it's important too that we don't just assume that a student's first preferred language is English, even if they're in an English environment, if they're EAL as well. So I think that was an important thing that I found when throughout reading some articles in relation to interprofessional collaboration.
It's so important. And we'll actually, that's a lovely segue. Thank you, Jess. We're just about to go on to that second reading now. So what is a child's first language? And if you're asking them to use the device at school to learn in, how competent are they in English? And does the device support both languages? Because you need to think about an AAC user whose family speak a different language at home, just like you think about any other bilingual child. This device is their voice. So it's really important that not to think just the device is their voice. It's like a wheelchair user. That wheelchair is their legs. You know what I mean? We need to think, can it go across all terrains? Can this device go across all terrains? And on that note, let us go back to, just check I'm sharing the right screen. Interprofessional learning. So interprofessional learning was defined in this reading as being made up of interprofessional practice and interprofessional education. And I confess that while I like this reading, I find those terms too close to each other, and I keep having to go back to the reading and saying, what's the difference again? Which one's learning and which one's education? Did anybody else find that? Or is that just me? Jess, you had that problem? Well, can anybody tell me what is, let's go with interprofessional practice. What is interprofessional practice according to this chapter?
Interprofessional practice was where two or more people communicate together.
Correct. And it should be done in a way that's mutually respectful. So that's not where the speechy calls the teacher in and says, here's how you do your job. Or it's not where the school calls the OT in and says, here's how we do things here. It's where you have people in a mutually respectful team working towards a common goal in a very client-centered or student-centered way. What about interprofessional education? Can anyone tell me what that is?
I will, only if anyone else does not.
Come on, anyone else? Anyone? Come on, Bronwyn, it's burning a hole. Let it out.
Which one are we talking about? Sorry.
Interprofessional education.
Education. So I don't remember the definition from the reading, but I'm assuming it's professionals teaching each other.
So yes, but it was very nicely put in the chapter. It said they learn with, from, and about each other.
Okay.
So it's a kind of very rich way of working together to develop a shared understanding of practice. And it's where you get that upskilling. So if that's going back to my conversation before with Kelly, it's where you get professional learning on the job embedded in a classroom where one professional knows something, another one doesn't. So let's give the example of early reading. Speech pathologists know an enormous amount about the articulation of sounds, the alphabetic principle. That's what they do for a living. So there's all sorts of cool stuff that they can do in the classroom, particularly for the teaching of reading. And then, for example, introducing cued articulation. Does anybody here use cued articulation in their classrooms? Kim, would you like to tell people what that is?
It's sort of hand signals, finger signals that represent a sound, the phoneme of the sound.
And why would you use it?
It gives an extra level of support for kids, a visual support for a sound. So if they can't pick it up from the grapheme, or they might be looking at a letter, or they're struggling with the sound, you might just, I might just do a signal. When I'm initially starting it, you know, we all learn it together, and we might all learn the sign. But as they're reading, I might just, you know, quietly do a sign, and then they'll fall into the word.
I've got a fabulous video I can show.
Especially you.
I can show you what it looks like. Think of Jacinta's example before, where she had the word she, and she was teaching the sound SH makes and the meaning of the word. So you put a picture there at the beginning to remind everybody what that word is, and then you take it away so that the eyes aren't distracted away from the letters you're trying to get them to decode. Cued articulation works the same way as that picture that you start with, that early model, and then remove. Cued articulation is an additional support there to assist a child to produce a sound. And it's a really cool thing. And let me show you what it looks like. And we just have, oh, nope. I have to share the sound, hang on.
You need Grammarly in your life. Grammarly is a digital writing.
Cued Articulation by Jane Passy. Let's begin. B, b, t, t, d, d.
We don't need to go through the whole video. You can look that up on your own, but you can see how useful that would be for the teaching of beginning of phonemes and graphemes and putting that pairing together and adding that additional visual support. So interprofessional collaboration gives teachers incredible on-the-job PL, but it really provides very student-centered services because everybody knows what role they play in achieving that long-term goal for the child. So I'm just going to, sorry, I have so many screens set up for teaching that it's hard for me to choose the right one to land on when I go back to sharing. There we go. So interprofessional learning is the product of these two things together, and the aim is to promote understanding and appreciation of the knowledge and the work and the different roles that everybody's got on that student's team, and aims to develop attitudes of respect and an openness to learn with, from, and about each other. And there's every reason to include parents in there as well, particularly given what we've talked about tonight. What I wanted to draw your attention to in particular was that this reading specified that knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values were shown to be extremely important. For particular ones were shown to be very important for the success of interprofessional practice. Values and ethics, roles and responsibilities, communication, and teamwork. So what I'd like you to do now, and I'm going to copy and paste those particular, those four into the chat, and talking about what I'm going to put you back in your groups. And I want you to think about the barriers and the facilitators that you talked about at your school. And it can be another school, for example, you know what I mean, one that you've seen. So where would you target improvement in the interprofessional practice in that school based on those four things? If you wanted to address one of those barriers, what would you say needs to happen? All right, so I'm going to copy and paste them. Sorry. Into the chat. Here they are. So if you wanted to see a change in the school that you discussed before, Would you target people's beliefs, ethics, and values? Is that where you'd start? Is this a hearts and minds exercise that you need to go on? Is there a need for better clarity around roles and responsibilities? Is it the communication that's the problem? Are people's values and beliefs in the right place and everybody knows what their role is, but they're not communicating? Is that the problem? Or is it the fact that they don't know how to work as a team? The collaboration factor is missing. Or is it multiple? So I'm going to reopen the breakout rooms. I'm going to give you just 5 minutes to chat about that, bat around some ideas, and then I'm going to give you time to write your Moodle responses. And I will drop in and see how you're all going. My dog is scratching at the door. Hello. All right, I think we have everyone back. Have we got everyone back? Yes, we do. Okay, how did we go? Anyone have any interesting conversations about where their school needs to shift? Suzanne B, where did you land? Oh no, have I done the wrong thing?
I volunteer as tricky.
Okay, are you running interference for Suzanne?
No, Suzanne thought she dodged a bullet by talking last time and we did it.
Oh, right. It's just that your face was right in front of me.
We were continuing our conversation about devices going from classrooms to specialists, and actually we're talking about the specialist to classroom teacher relationship and that dynamic, and it kind of fits into all four areas. Like, it needs to be a value shift on both sides, classroom teachers having more time to kind of explain things to specialist teachers that are happening in the classroom, and vice versa, because the settings are different. So having more of that appreciation and understanding what each other's roles are. And we had an interesting chat about whether or not IEP goals could be centered around, if a student really loves art, having art included in the IEP and the specialist teacher part of that support group, rather than them always
working from a strengths-based approach. What a revolution.
Yeah, so we were just kind of chatting more about that specialist teacher to classroom teacher dynamic, and both sides being more accountable to each other. Yeah.
Sounds like a fabulous conversation. Candice, what about you? What did you talk about in your room?
We talked about how Bronwyn and our settings are very different again. And I spoke about kind of the value side and the roles and responsibilities, but more from us to parents, like the understanding from the parents' understanding. So we've got one particular child whose parent believes, because that child's brought the funding into the school, that aid is specifically for that child, and expects the aid to sit right next to them. And when the child goes home and says that the aid wasn't there or the aid helped someone else, the parent comes in all hard and strong. So we're like, it's that changing the values, but also understanding the roles of the staff that we've got.
Yep.
And Bronwyn had hers were mainly the roles and responsibilities as well from her school.
Interesting. So most of the rooms that I managed to visit, and then hearing what I've heard from you now, you're all sitting at those points numbers 1 and 2 as the kind of critical points to start getting some change. Interesting. Now I'm aware of the time, but I did want to give people a couple of minutes to ask questions about the assignment. And where's my I did also want to draw your attention to the fact that I've taken the topic 11 discussion point out of the assignment. So this is week 10. This will be your last discussion point that you need to do for the assignment. I found a way to take another layer off, because I know that everybody in this group is really having a tough semester. So I hope that helps. So get this week's one done, and then all you've got to do is write your assignment. Yes, Jess, let's hear questions about the assignment.
Just on that, the substituted of the 400 word count, can that be dispersed evenly throughout the discussion points and the assignment?
So what I've done, let me bring up the rubric. So no, I've already done that way. I've already redistributed it. I didn't like the way the weighting worked. It seemed to not give enough value to the work you were doing in part 2.
Yeah.
And it was a poor swap. you know, you put all that work into researching and writing. I want to be able to give you the marks, if you like. So I've already reallocated them.
Awesome, thanks.
Any other questions? How are people going with the assignments? Is it all still a thought in your head, a glint in your eye?
Kate,
Yes.
I wanted to ask, I'm having a little bit of trouble because I wanted to choose the adjusting curriculum.
Yep.
So do I choose one high leverage practice to focus on? Because actually adjusting curriculum is quite big.
It is big. It is very big. I'm almost tempted to advise you not to do it for this assignment because it's going to become so unwieldy.
Yes, because that's what I'm actually finding. I've spent quite a lot of time on it, and every time I read, I just sort of think it's huge.
Yeah, I agree. I think you've wandered into a kind of ballroom rather than a small little, you know what I mean? I think it's a big topic. I wouldn't call, yeah.
Because I know that some people have actually chosen one high leverage practice to focus on. So if you're recommending that we don't choose that topic, how are those people going to feel about that now?
I don't think that will affect them. Choosing one high leverage practice is what was my suggestion in the instructions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
so keep it narrow and bounded. I want two things from this assignment for you. One, to get a really good in-depth understanding of one high leverage practice that you've chosen.
Okay.
And two, to build on the feedback I gave you from assignment one to try to refine your academic writing. There are a few of you in here, one, that's Christy, who's Kirsty? Christy, you're the only one in here who I think isn't kind of new in or recently returned to study. So what I want everybody to do is build on those recommendations for writing, for structuring, for referencing, for synthesizing, all of those things that I asked you to do. And so by focusing on one practice, you'll get to be able to do an in-depth, analysis of that practice and do justice to your writing. Otherwise, you'll be trying to cram too much in. I don't want to overwhelm you. That was a long way of saying I don't want to overwhelm you, Jennifer.
Okay, thank you.
Jess.
Sorry, this should be my last one. I haven't chosen a high leverage practice. I've chosen interprofessional collaboration, hence why I kind of know a little bit about this topic.
Yep.
But I found that that was streamlined too. I didn't find that too overwhelming.
No, I'd call that a practice.
Yeah.
I think that's bounded.
Just
enough.
making sure that I've done the right thing because I've
absolutely
put a fair way into it.
Yeah. Any other questions? Robert?
I'm a little bit behind, but I will get there.
That's okay.
So with the readjustment with week 11 not counting,
yep.
Does that mean that it's still 2000, or is that now switched to being 1600 and 2400?
That's a good question. Have I adjusted that in the Moodle site?
No, I'm looking at it now.
Okay, I thought I had adjusted everything in the Moodle site.
So it still says approx 2000 words total for part A.
Let me fix that right now. Where are you? Assessment 2, edit, settings.
But if you go over the word count in the discussion points, because I know I have on 2 weeks.
Yep. By how much, Suzanne?
Oh, by 100 words each one.
Because you know the university policy is 10% of the overall either way, don't you?
Yes.
Do references count?
No, they don't.
Right.
It's very hard with those discussion points to keep it.
Yes, it is.
So that's all right. So
Robert, where's the bit? I found one, but I'm just checking. I don't want to miss something.
So I'm looking at Monash University Assessment 2.
Yeah, hang on.
Let me refresh the page in case it's changed in those
Oh
last couple
Lord,
of
these
seconds.
sharing settings are doing my head in. Okay.
Do you mind if I share my screen?
I'm going to share mine because I'm in the middle of editing it.
Oh, brilliant.
So I've just gone into the page. Each response should be approximately 400 words. And there's
So now it says 1600.
So it now says 1600, but I haven't saved this yet. Is there
so
another
in
number?
my version it says 2000.
Yep. And that's the only one that I need to change?
That I saw. And
Right,
that would then push the part B up to 2400.
You see, if I was smart, I'd have said, oh, you can all live with the original instructions. It's too hard for me to change things and not make errors. So sorry about the confusion. And also, I believe I pasted a different link into the newsletter for this week for the Zoom meeting. And so some of you went to a different meeting. I am so sorry. I'm teaching 2 units and they're next to each other in my calendar, and I've copied the wrong link across, and humble apologies.
It was okay. We kind of got a chance to debrief about the assignment. So it kind of, it was a good 20 minutes, and we're all sitting there and we're like, if no one's here by 5:30, we're going.
And
over a mass influx at 5:20.
Okay.
Over the pandemic, I think we all probably made some mistakes while teaching
Oh
online.
Lord, you know, none of us are perfect. Are there any other questions about the assignment?
Just one more, just to clarify, the reflective essay for assignment 1, we could use first person. Is this the same for analytical review for this one, or is this third person?
So this one is less so. So let me go back to the instructions. And I'm in edit mode. I don't know if that's going to work. So the second part, it's an analytical review where you're defining key terms and making the case, and then you're providing an overview of the research. So the reason I'm not giving you a very clear answer is it'll be rarely appropriate to use I in this kind of essay. You might, for example, say in your advanced organizer, in the sections that follow, I will discuss this, then, do you know what I mean? So you can do it when you're providing those kind of intentional statements there. Or in the conclusion, you might say, as I demonstrated above, or something like that. What's not appropriate is the I believe statements, because this is an overview of the evidence.
Thank you.
That was a good question. These are good questions. Anyone got any more? Robert. It's fine to ask questions.
when you're defining key terms, does that still have to be in paragraph format? Because it's kind of easier to do it as like a informal, like as a glossary at the start of a piece of writing, but I'm not sure that's the correct way of doing it at all.
So let me take Jess's example. She's doing interprofessional collaboration. Jess might say, there are a range of ways this is defined in the literature. In this essay, I will use the definition provided by X 2019 or something like that, where they refer to, like, so let's say you were using that chapter and you say they define it as being made up of this and those things, you know what I mean? So you should do it in the body of the essay.
Thank you.
It doesn't have to be too lengthy.
Depends how many key terms you got, I guess.
Well, it does. Yeah. Save your glossary for your PhD, Robert.
I've got a question. Sorry.
Yes, that's right.
It's not really a question. I took your advice and I got onto the librarian and had 15 minutes, which turned into an hour. And she showed me how to use Zotero. And
how great are librarians?
Oh, unreal. So I've used it to write this one, and honestly, it saved me about half the time from the last one.
Fantastic.
So I'm wondering, has anyone got everyone's emails? Because I did up a how to use it thing, and I can't remember who it was, said that they went through my instructions and used it, and it was fabulous.
Kelly, are you happy to put your email up on on the discussion, like as on Moodle? And then you can say, contact me here if you want to know more about Zotero.
Yeah, no worries, I can do that.
Yes, Jess.
Just on the referencing tools, you went over EndNote as the one that we could use as well.
Yep.
Is there much of a difference in them, like from you personally? Because you said you use EndNote. Have you tried the other one, or is it?
I haven't.
For apples?
You know the phrase about not teaching an old dog not being able to learn a new trick.
So
I spent years using EndNote. People tell me that Zotero is much more intuitive. I had a law student
that had used both, and she said for someone that's doing a 2-year course that you want user friendly, Zotero's the go.
Okay, there you go.
Just that it was simpler. Yeah.
So I'll transfer all my journal out.
If you've already learned to use EndNote, then you already know how to use it.
Just continue to use it.
Yeah.
We'll see if I've learned how to use it within my assessment.
Well, and I'd have alerted you to the fact that slurping the citations across from Google Scholar will bring errors. You do still need to check
for
them.
Sure.
And that's everybody. I just got the proofs back from an article and I had errors in my referencing list. Like it's, you know, it's just attention to detail. Any other questions? All right, our work here is done. Thank you once again for joining me. I do hope you enjoyed this evening. It was new content introduced into the course for this year, and I hope it was useful and valuable. And I will look forward to reading your responses on Moodle, and I will run an assignment support next week. I will just be here for an hour. I'll put that information up. I recommend you come along with drafts, and I can put you in, and even if they're drafts of, you know, just your introduction or whatever you've got done, I can put you in breakout rooms. You can do peer feedback, the kind of thing that you did at the beginning when you were in the wrong room tonight. You know, maybe it was the right room. So we can do some of that next week. So if you're free next week, I will run another session for you. Okay. I will see you then.
Okay.
Enjoy your evening.
Everyone.
Bye.